What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Tech Talk number 14 today. Don't stand so close to me. Right? So we're gonna talk all about.
Are you gonna call the police on us?
Ooh, we might call the police, and they if they come, there might be a sting. Boom, boom. Wow,
Yes,
that just in full effect this morning. But yeah, so yeah, Tech Talk number 14. Don't stand so close to me. We're going to be talking about standalone and non-standalone networks. We're going to talk a little bit about the bands and all that kind of good stuff. And I mean, again, we're talking about bands. We're talking about don't stand so close to me. We're talking about the police and Sting. It's all just coming together, you know? Really,
music to my ears.
Oh boy! So Ryan Bowman, Brian East, and yeah, we're here with another week of some awesome tech jargon and conversation and discussion. So without any further ado, let's just jump right into it. And let's just talk about standalone, non-standalone. So I keep saying the names, but what I also want to talk about a little bit is you'll see this with all of the major U.S. carriers. You'll sometimes see when they're referring especially to the 5G network, you'll see SA and NSA, and that's literally what it stands for, standalone and non-standalone. What that really means is when your router, your device authenticates to the network, what part of the network it's actually connecting to first to then get that 5G signal. So as non-standalone can be referred to, right? That means the 5G network itself isn't standing alone. So therefore, your device is typically authenticating and connecting to the 4G side of the network, right? The existing part of that U.S. carrier's network. And then from there, it's going to get some information, and then it's going to get its 5G connection and kind of do its thing. But the authentication happens on that non-standalone. It's really important to understand that because there are some unique features and solutions that we're going to see down the road here in the future as the carriers move over to a 5G standalone network. So very important from that perspective, right? So
it's good to note, because when I hear as the carriers move to a standalone 5G network, don't be alarmed. 4G LTE is not going away anytime soon. It's still going to be with us for a long time. Remember how old 3G is, and it's just now getting deprecated. So over the last couple of years. So no worries there. You're still going to have your LTE for quite some time. No need to rush onto the 5G bandwagon out of fear.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point, Brian, because there is so much going on with IoT solutions and Cat M1 and narrowband IoT and all of that kind of stuff. And those are long-term solutions, right? When we're talking about electric metering and sensoring and all that. All of that's running over the LTE networks at the carriers, right? So good point there. It's going to be around for a while. There's some distinct, awesome advantages to 5G. Obviously, the big ones are, larger and higher bandwidth and lower latency. And so every solution has its niche on what side of the network and what connectivity it really needs to be on. So bands and more bands. That does not look like the police, but maybe they're over there like a cover band singing "Don't Stand So Close to Me" or something. I'm a drummer, so I don't think that looks like Stuart Copeland. I don't remember him ever having a beard. So here we go with 5G bands by deployment. So another number letter combination you're going to see when we're talking about the frequencies that are used for 5G deployments, C-band deployments, millimeter wave, you're going to see a letter N in front of them, which is why if you look at the slide right now, everything has N in front of it, N as in Nancy, right? So that is the actual bands that are being used from the carriers to deploy 5G. So a really common band in the U.S. is that N77 band. If you look at Verizon and AT&T are using it, that's they're deploying a lot of their C-band on there. N78, as you can see, is the most highly deployed. I believe that's also C-band. It's in that really awesome Goldilocks middle of the road area. and we'll talk a little bit about why that's so important from a frequency standpoint. It's being used more internationally, but yeah. So let's chat a little bit about the frequency. So if we can do a quick.
And it's important to note there's a cool new development with 5G in so much that in an international scene, 4G, there was really no coordination between countries on what band was what. And they've started to really kind of formalize which bands apply to which, what are they going to be used for exactly. And so that's why we see band N78 blowing everybody else out of the water, because all these countries in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia has a huge network. China has a huge network. All of them got together and decided, all right, just, this isn't a peace talk or anything. We're just going to simplify things, and 78 is 78, and it's going to do the same thing everywhere.
Man, if we could have peace talks and agree like we do on cellular bands, we might be in a better shape. So as you say that, that's one of the few things the entire world can agree on: the right band.
Yes.
So anyhow, no, that's a great point, Brian. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about historically where we're at LTE into 5G when it comes to frequencies, right? So by nature, and we talk about this a pretty good amount. I know Brian covered this on Wi-Fi propagation, but really the lower the number of megahertz or gigahertz the signal is, right? So I'm going to use Verizon because that's my background. It's really easy. 700 megahertz is what we deployed in 2011 or 2010 or 11 when we deployed LTE, right? 700 megahertz was really awesome because if you can think of my microphone as the cell tower, so at 700 megahertz, the actual signal from the tower would drive further because it's a lower frequency than, let's say, 1 gig or 2.5 gig or whatnot, right? When we were doing this conversation a couple weeks ago regarding Wi-Fi, we were talking about how the 2.4 gigahertz will go further than the 5 gigahertz signal, right? And so when you look at it that way, the 700 megahertz signal goes much further from a waveform spectrum, right? It's covering more area from the tower. The bad news is the lower that signal, like 700 megahertz, it cannot produce as much bandwidth as far as throughput. So you can only put so much data through it, right? So that's where you kind of get capped on some of those speeds, which is why 5G was invented, right? So the higher the frequency, the better speeds and bandwidth you get, which is why 5G, took an LTE. I remember when LTE launched, we used to say 5 to 12 meg down, 2 to 5 meg up, and sub 100 milliseconds latency. And then 5G rolls on, and it's like sub, 10 or 15 seconds latency, and we're talking 100 to a gig down, and somewhere between like 50 to 200 meg up. Like ginormous numbers compared to 4G. However, when we go back to the tower here, the higher the frequency, again, and when we're looking at this, you're looking at 3,500 megahertz instead of 700, right? So 35 megahertz is 3.5 gigahertz, right? But it doesn't travel as far from the tower. So you do lose some of the advantages of something like an LTE signal when you are going to that higher frequency. What you gain is you gain better speeds and faster latency, but what you lose is coverage. And so from a network standpoint, they have to bear that into consideration when they're trying to deploy the 5G technologies, every one of the carriers. So understand that's kind of it. So we call C-band Goldilocks because if you go too high on the gigahertz, you're way up there, you're doing crazy amounts of data. And I'll use Verizon millimeter wave for this, right? It was a good example. They had to have an antenna outside because it couldn't penetrate through buildings, right? It's a super fast highway of data, but unfortunately has a very short distance, and things like walls and windows and barriers in the way cannot get that signal through, which is why they use an outside antenna. So C-band came along and is just blowing the doors off. We called it the Goldilocks frequency because it was right in the middle. It did a good deal of propagation, not as much as LTE, but more than millimeter wave, and it did a great job with throughput and speed.
So really, if I can interject for just a quick sec,
sure.
What does this mean to the customer? What it means is we would first figure out how far away are we from the cell source, right? How far are we away from the tower? And that's going to drive which bands we really want to focus on, right? So if you are really, really far, you're going to go with one of those lower gigahertz, lower megahertz bands, like the 700, that can travel really far. You're not going to get all that great speed. But if you've got a tower really close to you and that can support all the bands that we're talking about, well, you might be enticed to throw an antenna on the roof and capitalize on that very, so you can get a higher band right there, a higher megahertz, and really capitalize on that increased speed, because you don't need that far distance, right? We're talking the trade-off is distance and throughput, right? If you don't have too much distance, you could capitalize on that greater throughput. And that's all about configuring your router, configuring your antenna, figuring out which bands do we want to focus on and which ones we might discard. But go ahead, Ryan.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. And that's, I think, where we come in, right? Like, we can help your customers with that. We can help our partners with that. And we have that knowledge and experience to be able to sit down and make sure we have the relationships with the carriers to sit down and understand tower location and what we're trying to accomplish. So that's perfect. So let's just chat a little bit about standalone versus non-standalone. And as you can look on the left-hand side, you have that standalone, right? So your phone, your tablet, your router, it will connect to each network almost separately, right? And it can actually connect to the same tower and do this, but the visualization here of each tower, I think, makes it a little bit more simplistic for us to kind of take a look and see what that looks like versus non-standalone. You can see where there is not a direct connection in the background of that data path, right? So it's connecting to 5G, but it's still connecting to the LTE equipment on the back end, right? Instead of the 5G core from a network. So we're not going to get into who's got the standalone, who doesn't right now. Just understand that this is where everyone's moving to. There's going to be some distinct advantages by having a standalone network, and there's less limitations. And what those look like is really, again, some greater flexibility, analytics, and the big one that everyone's chatting about is network slicing, which is really awesome because, and that kind of falls into flexibility as well, but network slicing allows a carrier to carve out a portion of the network for a customer. Now, this is, enterprises right off the bat are going to be able to take advantage of this, but think of manufacturing and some of the larger enterprises that they literally want their own slice of the network.
Public safety.
Yeah, public safety is another good one, right? So they'll literally get their part of the network. It will be enclosed, it will be isolated, and they can kind of do whatever they want. So it takes private network a whole lot further down the road because you're actually literally getting network elements instead of just a tunnel inside the network, right? So huge advantage there. And really some cool stuff coming down the road, obviously, to help with different applications and how folks want to use it. So like everything 5G, I feel like we're still blazing a lot of trails. There's still a lot of solutions that are coming to the surface. We've seen some manufacturing, we've seen some public safety, we've seen some healthcare solutions, and there'll just be more and more because this is one of those networks that as it's out and about and people are using it, you're going to see creativity kind of flow to the top and people realize they can do something with this network that they didn't even think about before. But now that they have the network, they're able to see that. So some really cool stuff happening there. So that's NSA and SA and all that good stuff. Last a week or two ago, I showed an enclosure and it was empty. And what I'm going to do now, I don't have the fully capable enclosure with me live, right? We shipped it to the customer. But what I am going to do is at the end of the video here, I'll have some still pictures of the enclosure now that it's been fully kitted out and shipped to our customer and ready to rock and roll. And you'll see it's got a CPU in it. It's got a power supply and lightning protection. It's got a router inside it, right? Giving connectivity, fully waterproof, ready to roll. So So just a really cool solution we provided from one of our partners and customers, and we wanted to make sure we kind of gave you an update for that. So that's going to be this week's tech, and it'll be some still pictures after we are done here. So, Brian, am I missing anything else?
I don't think so.
Awesome.
I think you rocked it out.
Good deal. Yeah. So again, that's NSA SA and the bands. It was a very musically informed day today, and we'll catch
you rocked it.
Everybody, what's that?
Did you catch that earlier?
You rocked
it out.
I didn't even catch that, man. The puns. It's a good
The
day.
worse the pun, you call it a punion.
Punion.
Like kind of a pun and a funion.
Yeah, I get you. Interesting.
So next week. Routing
protocols.
Yep.
We're gonna be diving into it, folks.
Yeah.
We're putting the tech in the tech talk.
We're talking BGP, OSPF, EIGRP. Old McDonald had a farm. EIGRP, RIP, RIP. So
does IPsec fall into that?
Do what?
Does IPsec fall into that?
No, but
No.
IPsec works with, because IPsec is unsecured.
Okay.
Or it can be set as unsecured.
Yep.
And it can act as a carrier for these routing protocols, and so you'll put in like a BGP with an IPsec or an EIGRP or a RIP
or a GRE. So
actually, GRE is a tunneling protocol, just like IPsec. Verizon has Nemo. You've got OpenVPN, L2TP.
Yeah, cool. I'm going to learn a lot because I am not a routing protocol guy. Let's put it that way from the engineering side. So I was going to say I'm not a router guy, but I definitely know.
He is a router guy.
But yeah, going further into it. So looking forward to it. Everyone check out our LinkedIn, YouTube, all that good stuff to see what we're doing and shaking and rocking and rolling. And everyone have.
Hey, also like and subscribe so we can all get rich.
Yes, definitely.
On ads. I think we have like 75 followers right now. We're on the cusp. 17 million.
Yeah, here we go. So something like that. All right.
Yeah,
so for real, have an amazing day. See you, everybody.
Yeah. Rock on.